If you've ever struggled to get your tracks sounding thick, warm and loud, it's probably because you haven't mastered what I'm about to show you in this video. Logic Pro 11 has just been released. In the latest Logic Pro 11, they've released a new plugin that's going to help you achieve everything I just mentioned. It's a huge game changer for Logic users, and my god, does it sound good. Hey, what's up everybody? It's Fabio from Noise here at Boombox, the home of collaboration. When a company like Apple or Ableton upgrade a version from 9 to 10 or 10 to 11, I usually expect some fairly major software and aesthetic changes. But Logic 11 looks exactly the same. So what's really going on? And the question is Logic 11 any good? Now, one of the reasons I think that this 11 update feels small is because they already did some major add-ons before Christmas, so in 2023. Apple dangled the carrot by showing us the AI Auto-Tune and AI mastering plugins that they added, which was a bit of an indicator for what was to come. Unsurprisingly, they've continued with their AI theme, adding AI drummer, bass player, piano player, and what I really want to focus on today, AI saturation, which is what they've called ChromaGlow. It's a brand new saturation plugin from the Logic 11 update that actually blows other third-party saturation plugins out of the water. So what is ChromaGlow? Well, lucky for you, I've pulled up the manual and I've read through the entire thing, and we're going to take a look at Apple's description of their new plugin. ChromaGlow is a saturation plugin designed to replicate the warmth and coloration of analog audio equipment by introducing harmonic distortion to incoming audio signals. It emulates the non-linear response and subtle compression found in analog gear. This process enriches the harmonic content of the audio, resulting in a more nuanced and textured sound with enhanced character and depth. Additionally, the subtle compression effect helps to smooth out dynamics and tame transients, contributing to a polished and professional sounding result. Now, what does that actually mean? Let me explain it like this. If you've never used saturation before, well, what it does is increases harmonic content. So when you see frequency points on a sound, imagine that it's adding more. Now, depending on the circuit that it's emulating, from various bits of analog gear, whether that be tube or tape, transformers, and so on, they will affect the signal in a different way. Now, as important as this description is, it's much better to do things by ear, which is exactly what we're going to focus on today. Let's take a look at the different parameters that ChromaGlow has to offer. ChromaGlow lives in your audio effects, and you'll find it in distortion just below Bit Crusher. We've got the different models, so these are the different types of circuits that I spoke about earlier: retro tube, modern tube, magnetic, squeeze, and analog preamp. And for each of those, you have two styles: clean and colorful. So clean being more subtle, colorful obviously being more intense. We'll go into detail with what each one means per style in a little bit. We've got a bypass below, so we can turn this all the way up to 10,000. We can actually stop the saturation affecting the signal up to and below 10,000 hertz. We've got the level in, so the input, the level out, the output, and the mix if you want to do parallel processing. Next, we've got the dial you'll be using the most, which is the drive, how much saturation you'll be applying, so how much of the effect you'll be adding to the signal. And then we've got low cut and high cut, which is great. So we've got pre and post. So this is pre, so you can do a low cut on your signal before coming into the saturation plugin, or after, which is quite useful because sometimes saturation creates these harmonics, adds frequencies to the low frequencies, and that can be problematic and make things muddy, so we can cut those out. We've also got the same for the high cut. Now, sometimes saturation might make things sound a bit fizzy or harsh, so you might want to do a bit of a high cut to roll off some of those high frequencies that the saturation is adding. You've also got different slopes. Now, if you're unfamiliar with slopes, this is a slope. It goes from 6 all the way to 48. So this is how steeply you're cutting off those frequencies. Obviously, the smoother, more natural it will sound, the steeper, the more unnatural, depending on what you're going for. And then you've got the resonance here, which is essentially this, known as the Q or the quality in an EQ. And you have that for low cut and high cut, of course. Before we get started, let's take a listen to the track we're going to be using today, which is one of my own. This is called Forbidden Fruit, and it features a very talented vocalist called Eric Pierce. This track is currently unreleased, but if you follow me on Spotify, I'll leave a link in the description below. It will be coming out fairly soon.
Things ever moved me like you do. It's like tasting a forbidden fruit. Moved me like you do.
The reason I chose this track is because there's lots going on. There's drums, vocals, lots of synthesizers, and I'm in the process of mixing it as well, which is the perfect time to start applying saturation. Let's start with the drums. So I've added retro tube on the colorful setting, which Logic says replicates the warmth and even order harmonics characteristic of vacuum tube equipment, offering a smooth and pleasant distortion that infuses audio and warmth with a vintage ambiance. I mean, and that sounds great. So let's go for it. But take note of the two styles. Clean, subtly and smoothly adds a touch of warmth. Colorful introduces a significant amount of character to the sound while also imparting a noticeable sense of muddiness. So let's see if that's the truth and flip between the two. I mean, there is a little bit of muddiness, but I wouldn't say a lot. I'm going to drive it a little bit harder and see if that makes a difference. Okay, now I hear it. I do actually quite like the muddiness that it's adding. For me, it's adding a bit of thickness to those mids and low mids. So I'm going to go with it. I'm going to pull the drive down a bit. Now I've also added this other plugin underneath because what I want to show you and what I was talking about with getting your tracks to sound as loud as possible, well, saturation is one of the best tools for this. Usually because when you add enough saturation, it starts clipping the signals. So it starts clipping those transients and it adds harmonic content at the same time. So you get a thicker and louder sounding signal, but without an increase in metered volume. If you're working on a project just like I am here, well, then you're gonna need somewhere to store it safely and securely. And if you're working with a vocalist like I am, you're also going to need an easy way to collaborate on any feedback notes or changes that you need to make to your track, which is why Boombox is the perfect platform for musicians made by musicians. It's not just a cloud storage platform, but on Boombox, you can add timestamp feedback as text or voice notes. You can quickly and easily share your files, add collaborators, and set their access permissions, as well as build a profile where you can make yourself discoverable, available for hire, and search for other worldwide talent. The best part about it is it's completely free. Link is in the description below. Sign up today and make your studio workflow faster so you can enjoy performing it on stage. Let's get back to saturation, shall we? So let's try turning this on and off. We'll start with it off. Check the peak, turn it on, listen to the perceived increase in volume, and also then check the peak again. So right now it's adding about a dB of gain to the peak. I'm going to change to colorful and see if that makes a difference. So here we can clearly see that with it off, it's actually peaking higher, but sounds quieter. And then with it on, it's peaking lower, but sounds louder, which is exactly what we're going for. So overall, I love the way this sounds. Retro tube, colorful on the drums. It sounds very musical, very good to me. Let's move on to the next sound. Now on this lead sound that I have, I wanted to add the modern tube. So according to Apple, the modern tube imparts the harmonic richness, gentle compression, and pleasing distortion that is typical of tube-based gear. This type of saturation can add warmth, character, and a vintage vibe to audio signals, making it a popular choice for enhancing the sound of individual tracks or entire mixes. Now, that's a little bit confusing because surely the retro tube adds the vintage vibe and the modern tube adds the modern tube vibe, like a cleaner sounding tube. I guess if you drive it more, you can get more of that vintage vibe that it talks about. But what it's pointing to here is that you could use it as a mastering application, and maybe that's where it sounds more vintage, but I'm just going to use it on this lead sound. So here it is without anything. Already a great sound, but let's add the modern tube. notice how it brings out some of those frequencies in the high end in quite a pleasant way. Here's without. And with. Adds like a bit of a sheen. I quite like that. I think it sounds good. It's going to sound great in the mix. I've added a low cut as well because I did notice some low frequencies creeping up on me with the modern tube that it was adding to the signal, and I don't want that because this isn't a bass sound. Now don't forget that there are 2 styles here. The clean delivers a pristine and transparent sound with a touch of warmth. It preserves the clarity of the audio, which is probably why we're hearing those high frequencies enhanced, while subtly enhancing it with the characteristics typically associated with tube amplification. Colorful blends classic warmth with modern clarity, offering rich, harmonically nuanced audio reminiscent of vintage amps but with improved fidelities. Okay, so that's the vintage vibe that they're talking about. Let's try it out. I'm not noticing a huge difference, to be honest, other than I prefer the clean version, so I'm going to stick with that. Next, we've got the ARP, and I decided to use the magnetic model for this. If you're familiar with magnetic, then you'll know that this mimics the saturation and compression qualities of analog tape machines. It introduces a warm, organic, and slightly compressed sound with added harmonics. It's great for achieving a vintage analog feel. Seeing as we're here, Colorful turns on the transformer component to deliver a saturated, warm, and character-rich sound. Clean turns off the transformer for a cleaner signal with less harmonic content. Now notice how here they start with colorful, even though it suggested that, that's not what I went for, but we will flick through it. I've added it to this really cool sounding ARP. That goes on throughout the entire track pretty much, especially in the choruses. And I thought maybe it could do with a bit more character, a bit more distortion, not too much subtle saturation. So what I've done is I've driven it to 100%. I've brought the level down. I'm also bypassing below 245 hertz, so the saturation is not affecting anything there. And I've got a low cut on it post, so 174 hertz. I noticed it was adding some low frequencies, which I didn't want, so it's got a low cut at 174. Especially when the ARP opens up, it's really bringing out some of that character. But I do feel that it's a bit heavy. It's a bit too much. I don't want everything to sound saturated, because if everything sounds really thick and full, then there won't be space. So I'm going to use the mix parameter to put the saturation in parallel, essentially have 50% of the saturation and 50% of the original signal. Can we also take a second for how good this analyzer that they've got here looks? It's top notch. It's so satisfying to use. Now with the squeeze model, I decided to use this on percussive elements because actually that's what it suggests. Squeeze replicates the saturation achieved through intentional pushing of a compressor, which introduces harmonic distortion and modifies the tonal characteristics of an audio signal. This imparts warmth, character, and color to the sound. It's funny because this is actually something that I do quite a lot with certain compressors. I put the attack and release really fast and I drive into them, so they sound more like a distortion unit than a compressor. It's like an intentional over-processing of the sound. But now I have it here in ChromaGlow. And just so we're clear, soft press delivers smooth, natural compression with gentle characteristics, and hard press generates assertive, punchy compression with evident distortion. And here it says, particularly on percussive sounds, which is what I did. So here's the fill without anything. Really cool fill, one more time. Happens right before the drop, you know, give it a little bit of impact. And here it is with squeeze, hard press at 40%. Oof, it brings out that reverb, makes it sound so much bigger, and it's taming some of those peaks. Listen again. I like the thickness that it's adding to that. I also tried it out on this clap fill. This is one of the more obvious models. I don't think you would use this a lot, but it's there if you want it, and it does sound awesome. Next, we have the analog preamp model. Provides an assertive, vibrant, and punchy sound characterized by distinctively sharp and edgy quality in contrast to the smoother distortion of the tubes or gentle saturation of tape. I don't know which analog preamp it's modeled off, but it definitely is quite obvious as soon as you add it to the signal. Clean turns on transistor bass saturation circuit, and the colorful provides a vintage woolly sound with soft clipping. Now, preamps can be used for anything: guitars, drums, vocals, and that's exactly what I've decided to use it on. So let's take a listen to the vocal without anything, just to start.
Breaking all my rules for you, I know. Take me to a place I shouldn't go. I'm following you.
Amazing vocals by Eric Piers. Now here they are with the analog preamp. Notice how it kind of dulls the sound a little bit. I've got the drive fairly high, the style on clean, and pretty much nothing else. Just the level out a little higher because I noticed it brought the volume down.
Breaking all my rules for you, I know. Take me to a place I shouldn't go. I'm following you.
So if you're looking for something to take out some of the harshness from a signal, some of the brightness, then the analog preamp is definitely something I would turn to. I think this is too much. I'm actually going to bring this back by about 50%. I love that there's that feature in there. Incredibly useful.
Breaking all my rules for you, I know. Take me to a place I shouldn't go. I'm following you.
Definitely adds a thickness to the vocal, which I quite like. ChromaGlow actually works really well on the master. I've got it here in magnetic mode with the clean style, and I'm just adding a little bit of drive. It's very subtle, much more subtle than I anticipated, and it just seems to do something, glue it together, enhance the frequencies in such a pleasant and musical way. Now, a lot of companies, when they create saturation plugins, they overdo it. It sounds exaggerated. This sounds so good and pristine. I'm very impressed. Let me turn it on and off for you.
Move me like you do. It's like tasting the forbidden fruit.
And there you have it. This saturation plugin is so good, and I think we've been begging for it for the longest time. So thank you, Apple, for including this in the Logic 11 update, which is also free. Definitely go check it out, mess around with it. Thank you so much to everyone for tuning in. Don't forget that you can sign up for Boombox for free. Link is in the description below. Welcome to the home of music collaboration. It's been a pleasure as always, and I'll see you very soon. Peace.